The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle as Guardsman James Mitchell adjusted his iconic red tunic and towering bearskin hat. At 24 years old, he had been part of the Queen's Guard for 3 years, standing motionless for hours while tourists snapped photos and occasionally tried to make him laugh or react. The rules were crystal clear. Maintain perfect posture, keep eyes forward, and never break character no matter what happened around him. James took his training seriously. He had practiced the discipline required to ignore screaming children, loud tourists, and even the occasional prankster who would wave objects in front of his face. His fellow guardsmen respected him for his unwavering dedication to duty. The tourists might see them as living statues or tourist attractions, but James knew they were real soldiers with real responsibilities protecting the royal family and their residences. On this particular Tuesday morning in September, James noticed something different in the crowd gathering near his post at the main gate. Among the usual mix of international visitors and local families, he spotted a small figure in a wheelchair being pushed by an elderly woman. The child appeared to be around 8 years old, wearing a bright yellow jacket that seemed too big for his tiny frame. Even from his peripheral vision, James could see the boy's face light up with pure joy as he stared at the guards. The grandmother wheeled the boy closer, and James could hear her gentle voice explaining about the Queen's Guard and their important job protecting the castle. The child's enthusiasm was infectious, though James remained perfectly still. The boy pointed excitedly and whispered questions to his grandmother, who patiently answered each one while other tourists moved around them, taking their photos and moving on to the next attraction. What struck James most was the child's genuine fascination. Unlike many visitors who treated the guards as photo opportunities, this boy seemed to understand that he was looking at real soldiers. His eyes sparkled with admiration and respect that touched something deep in James's heart. The grandmother appeared tired but smiled warmly as she watched her grandson's excitement. She mentioned to another tourist that they had traveled from Scotland specifically so the boy could see the famous guards he had read about in his storybooks. As the morning progressed, James noticed the pair hadn't moved far. The grandmother had found a bench nearby where they sat watching the changing of the guard ceremony. The boy never took his eyes off the soldiers, following every precise movement with wonder. His small hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair as he leaned forward, not wanting to miss a single detail of the magnificent display of military tradition. During a brief moment when the crowd thinned, James caught sight of something that made his heart skip a beat. The little boy had tears streaming down his cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure joy and amazement. The child was overwhelmed by the beauty and majesty of what he was witnessing. His grandmother gently wiped his face and hugged him close, clearly understanding the profound impact this experience was having on her grandson. The boy whispered something to his grandmother, who shook her head gently and explained something back to him. From their body language, James could tell the child was asking for something his grandmother felt she couldn't provide. The disappointment on the boy's face was brief, replaced quickly by his continued fascination with the guards. But James had seen it, and it stayed with him. As his shift continued, James found his thoughts returning to the child in the yellow jacket. There was something about the boy's pure appreciation and respect that reminded him why he had chosen to serve in the first place. The tourists who tried to make him laugh or react often forgot that behind the uniform was a real person with feelings and emotions. But this child seemed to see both the uniform and the man wearing it, understanding instinctively that both deserved respect and admiration. The afternoon brought a steady stream of tour groups, but James's attention kept drifting to the bench where the grandmother and boy remained. They had unpacked a small lunch from their bag, and James watched as the grandmother carefully helped the child eat while he continued to gaze at the guards between bites. Other families came and went, but these two seemed content to spend their entire day simply watching and appreciating the ceremony and tradition unfolding before them. During the lunch break, James learned from his fellow guardsmen that the boy had been asking his grandmother if he could somehow meet one of the guards or shake hands with them. The grandmother had gently explained that the guards were working and couldn't talk to visitors, but the child's disappointment was evident. He had spent months reading about the Queen's Guard and had convinced his grandmother to make the long journey from their small town in Scotland just to see them in person. James discovered through overheard conversations that the boy's name was Tommy, and he was battling a serious illness that had confined him to the wheelchair. His grandmother, Mrs. Henderson, was his primary caregiver since his parents had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. This trip to see the guards was something Tommy had been dreaming about for months, and his grandmother had saved every penny to make it possible, despite their limited finances. The information hit James harder than he expected. Here was a child who had faced more hardship in his short life than many adults ever would, yet his eyes still held wonder and joy when looking at the world around him. Tommy's respect for the guards wasn't just casual interest. It represented hope, dreams, and perhaps an escape from his difficult reality into a world of honor, tradition, and courage. As the afternoon wore on, James noticed Tommy growing visibly tired, but he refused his grandmother's suggestions to leave. The boy was determined to see everything he could, to make every moment of this special day count. Mrs. Henderson looked exhausted herself, but her love for her grandson was evident in her patience and understanding. She never rushed him or complained about the long day, instead sharing in his excitement and pointing out details she thought he might find interesting. Around 3 o'clock, something unexpected happened that would change everything. A sudden gust of wind caught Tommy's favorite cap, a small replica of a guardsman's hat that he wore proudly, and sent it rolling across the courtyard. Mrs. Henderson was too far away to catch it, and Tommy could only watch helplessly as his treasured hat tumbled toward the busy walkway where hundreds of tourists were walking. James watched the scene unfold, knowing the hat would likely be stepped on or lost forever in the crowd. He could see the distress on Tommy's face and the apologetic frustration on Mrs. Henderson's as she tried to navigate through the crowd to retrieve it. Several tourists saw the hat, but walked past it, more focused on their own sightseeing than helping a distressed child. The hat came to rest just a few feet from James's post, close enough that he could easily reach it if he broke protocol. But doing so would mean stepping out of character, something that went against everything he had been trained to do. Guards had been disciplined for far less serious breaches of protocol. Yet as he watched Tommy's face crumple with disappointment and saw Mrs. Henderson's tired struggle to retrieve the cherished item, James felt something stirring inside him that was stronger than military discipline. In that moment, James realized that sometimes being a true guardian meant protecting more than just buildings and traditions. Sometimes it meant protecting the dreams and joy of a child who had already lost so much. The rules were important, but compassion was more important. The uniform represented service to others, and right now, a little boy needed his service more than the ceremony needed his perfect stillness. Without hesitation, James took 3 quick steps forward, bent down, and picked up Tommy's hat. The crowd around him gasped in surprise. Phones came out to capture the unexpected moment, and his fellow guards looked on in shock. James had broken the cardinal rule of the Queen's Guard, but as he walked toward Tommy and his grandmother, he felt more like a soldier than he ever had while standing perfectly still. The expression on Tommy's face transformed from despair to absolute wonder. His mouth fell open as this tall, imposing figure in the iconic red uniform approached him with gentle steps. Mrs. Henderson's eyes filled with tears of gratitude as she realized what was happening. James knelt down beside Tommy's wheelchair, bringing himself to eye level with the boy, and carefully placed the hat back on the child's head. "There you go, young man," James said softly, his voice warm and kind. "A guardsman never leaves another soldier behind." Tommy's eyes went wide with amazement, not just at meeting his hero, but at being called a soldier himself. His small hand instinctively went up in a salute which James returned with military precision and genuine respect. The crowd around them had gone completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something special. Tourists lowered their cameras, children stopped chattering, and even other guards found themselves moved by the scene unfolding before them. Mrs. Henderson whispered a heartfelt thank you, her voice breaking with emotion as she saw the pure joy radiating from her grandson's face. James spent several precious minutes talking with Tommy, asking about his journey from Scotland, and listening as the boy shared his extensive knowledge about the Queen's Guard that he had learned from books and documentaries. Tommy's enthusiasm and detailed questions impressed James, who realized this child knew more about their history and traditions than many of the tourists who visited daily. "You know," James said, glancing around to make sure they wouldn't be overheard, "we could use someone with your knowledge and dedication on our team. Would you be willing to be an honorary member of the Queen's Guard?" Tommy's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Tears of joy streamed down his face as he nodded enthusiastically, unable to speak through his emotion. James reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pin badge that featured the royal coat of arms, something he carried as a personal memento but had never thought he would give away. He carefully pinned it to Tommy's jacket and explained that it made him an official, honorary guardsman. Tommy looked down at the badge as if it were made of pure gold, his fingers gently touching it to make sure it was real. The moment was interrupted by the approach of James's commanding officer, who had witnessed the entire exchange. James stood, at attention, prepared to face the consequences of his actions. He knew he had broken protocol and was ready to accept whatever punishment awaited him. But as his superior approached, James noticed something unexpected in the older man's expression. It wasn't anger, but something that looked remarkably like pride. Colonel Matthews had served in the Queen's Guard for over 20 years and had seen countless breaches of protocol, most of them for foolish or selfish reasons. But this was different. He had watched the entire scene unfold and had seen the profound impact James's actions had on both the child and the crowd of witnesses. Sometimes, the colonel realized, true leadership meant knowing when to follow rules and when to follow your heart. Colonel Matthews approached the group with measured steps, his expression unreadable. James remained at attention, his heart pounding as he prepared for the reprimand that was surely coming. The crowd held its collective breath, sensing the tension of the moment. Tommy looked back and forth between the two soldiers, suddenly worried that his new friend might be in trouble because of him. To everyone's surprise, Colonel Matthews came to a halt in front of Tommy's wheelchair and gave the boy a crisp military salute. "Honorary Guardsman Tommy," he said in his commanding voice, "it's an honor to meet you, sir." The formality and respect in his tone made it clear that this wasn't mockery or play acting, but genuine recognition of the boy's new status. Tommy's face lit up with such pure happiness that several onlookers found themselves wiping away tears. He returned the salute as best he could, his small hand trembling with excitement and emotion. Mrs. Henderson watched in amazement as her grandson, who had endured so much pain and disappointment in his young life, experienced a moment of absolute joy and recognition. The colonel then turned to James with an expression that surprised everyone present. Instead of anger or disappointment, his face showed something that looked remarkably like approval. "Guardsman Mitchell," he said in a voice that carried across the courtyard. "That was exactly what a Queen's Guard should do. Sometimes protecting people means more than just standing still." The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause, understanding that they had witnessed something truly special. Tourists who had been taking photos put their cameras away and simply watched, recognizing that this moment was more important than any picture they could capture. Children in the crowd looked on with wide eyes, seeing their own sense of wonder and possibility reflected in Tommy's experience. James felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed immediately by a deeper sense of purpose. his commanding officers. Words confirmed what he had felt in his heart, that true service sometimes meant breaking from tradition to serve a higher purpose. The uniform he wore represented more than ceremony and tourism. It represented protection, service, and compassion for those who needed it most. Colonel Matthews spent several more minutes talking with Tommy, asking about his knowledge of military history and traditions. The boy's answers impressed not just the colonel, but several other guards who had gathered to witness this unprecedented scene. Tommy spoke with passion about the history of the Queen's Guard, their role in protecting the monarchy, and his dreams of one day serving his country in whatever way he could. The conversation revealed something remarkable about Tommy's character. Despite his illness and physical limitations, he hadn't lost his dreams of service and contribution. He spoke about wanting to help others and make a difference in the world, just like the guards he admired so much. His courage in facing his challenges with such grace and optimism impressed the seasoned soldiers more than any display of military skill ever could. As the afternoon continued, word of what had happened spread throughout the castle. Other guards, staff members, and even some members of the royal household came by to meet the honorary guardsmen who had captured everyone's hearts. Each person who met Tommy came away touched by his enthusiasm, courage, and genuine appreciation for their service and dedication. Mrs. Henderson watched with tears in her eyes as her grandson experienced the recognition and respect he had dreamed of. She had worried about making this expensive trip, wondering if it would live up to Tommy's expectations. Now she realized that no amount of money could have bought the gift her grandson was receiving, the gift of feeling valued, respected, and part of something larger than himself. As evening approached, Mrs. Henderson gently reminded Tommy that they needed to return to their hotel and prepare for their journey home the next morning. The disappointment on Tommy's face was heartbreaking, but he nodded understanding, knowing that this magical day had to come to an end. He carefully touched the honorary guard pin on his jacket one more time, as if to make sure it was still real and not just a wonderful dream. James watched the preparation for departure with mixed emotions. Seeing Tommy's joy had reminded him why he had chosen military service in the first place, and he found himself reluctant to see the boy leave. Something about Tommy's courage and positive spirit in the face of adversity had touched him deeply, and he realized that their encounter had changed him as much as it had changed the boy. Colonel Matthews approached James with an unusual request. He explained that word of the day's events had reached some very high places within the royal household, and there was interest in making Tommy's honorary position something more permanent and meaningful. The colonel asked if James would be willing to serve as Tommy's official mentor and correspondent, helping to maintain the connection they had formed. The proposal was unprecedented in the history of the Queen's Guard, but then again, so had been James's decision to step out of character to help a child in need. James accepted immediately, understanding that this connection could provide ongoing encouragement and purpose for Tommy, while also enriching his own sense of service and duty. Before Tommy and his grandmother left, James presented them with a special gift that he had quickly arranged with his fellow guards. It was an official letter of commendation, signed by Colonel Matthews and several other senior officers, formally recognizing Tommy as an honorary member of the Queen's Guard. The document outlined his courage, his dedication to learning about military history, and his positive spirit as qualities that exemplified the best traditions of service. Tommy held the letter with shaking hands, reading every word multiple times as if to memorize it completely. Mrs. Henderson helped him fold it carefully and place it in a special envelope to keep it safe during their journey home. The boy promised to frame it and hang it in his bedroom, where he could look at it every day and remember this incredible experience. The farewell was emotional for everyone involved. Tommy saluted each of the guards who had made his day special, thanking them not just for their kindness to him, but for their service to the country. His mature understanding of their sacrifice and dedication impressed the hardened soldiers, several of whom admitted later that they had learned as much from Tommy as he had learned from them. As Mrs. Henderson wheeled Tommy toward the exit, he turned back one final time to wave at his new friends. The guards maintained their formal positions, but several managed subtle acknowledgments of his farewell. James watched until the yellow jacket disappeared into the crowd, feeling a mixture of sadness at the parting and profound satisfaction at having been part of something truly meaningful. That evening, the story of Tommy and the guards spread throughout the military community and beyond. Local news outlets picked up the story, social media buzzed with photos and videos taken by witnesses, and the positive response was overwhelming. People from around the world expressed their admiration for both Tommy's courage and the guards' compassion, praising them for showing that true strength includes kindness and humanity. The incident became a teaching moment within the Queen's Guard, with Colonel Matthews using it to remind all personnel that their ultimate duty was to serve and protect people, and that sometimes this required flexibility and compassion rather than rigid adherence to protocol. The story of Tommy became part of the unit's unofficial history, inspiring other guards to remember the human element of their service. 6 months later, James received a letter that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Written in careful handwriting with help from Mrs. Henderson, Tommy shared news of his progress in treatment and how the memory of his day with the Queen's Guard continued to inspire him through difficult times. He described how he had shown his honorary guard pin and letter of commendation to his doctors and nurses, and how their respect for his achievement had given him strength during challenging medical procedures. The letter also included photographs of Tommy's bedroom, where the framed commendation held a place of honor above his bed. Surrounding it were drawings he had made of the guards, newspaper clippings about their meeting, and research projects he had completed about military history and traditions. His room had become a shrine to his passion for service and his connection to the Queen's Guard. Most remarkably, Tommy wrote about how his experience had inspired him to start a small support group for other children dealing with serious illnesses. He shared stories of the Guard's courage and dedication with his new friends, helping them find their own sources of strength and inspiration. The honorary guardsman had become a leader and mentor himself, passing on the gift of hope he had received. James shared Tommy's letter with Colonel Matthews and his fellow guards, and the response was immediate and heartwarming. The unit decided to establish an official relationship with Tommy's support group, sending care packages, letters of encouragement, and even arranging video calls with children who couldn't travel to London. What had started as one guard's spontaneous act of kindness had grown into a program that touched dozens of young lives. The story continued to ripple outward in unexpected ways. Other military units around the world heard about Tommy and the Queen's Guard, and several established their own programs to connect with children facing challenges. The simple act of retrieving a fallen hat had somehow sparked a movement of compassion and connection that crossed continents and cultures. A year after their first meeting, Tommy and Mrs. Henderson made another trip to London, this time as special guests of the Queen's Guard. Tommy's health had improved significantly, and while he still used his wheelchair, his energy and enthusiasm were stronger than ever. James was there to greet them, along with Colonel Matthews and many of the guards who had been part of that magical first day. This second visit was different, but equally special. Tommy was now an established member of the Queen's Guard family, and his arrival was celebrated like the homecoming of a cherished friend. He had prepared a presentation about his support group's activities and shared stories of how the Guard's example had helped other children find courage in their own battles. The visit culminated in a private ceremony where Tommy was presented, with a special medal created just for him, recognizing his service to other children and his embodiment of the Guard's values of courage, service, and compassion. As Colonel Matthews pinned the medal to Tommy's jacket, he spoke words that resonated with everyone present. Sometimes the greatest guards are not those who stand still, but those who inspire others to stand strong. James realized that his decision To step out of character that September day had changed not just Tommy's life, but his own and countless others. He had learned that true duty sometimes meant breaking rules, that real strength included vulnerability, and that the most important protection they could offer was not just physical safety, but the preservation of hope, dignity, and human connection. Years later, as James advanced through the ranks and eventually became a training instructor for new guards, he would always tell Tommy's story to remind new recruits that behind every uniform was a human heart, and that their greatest moments of service might come not from perfect protocol, but from perfect compassion. The touching time when a royal guard stepped out of character had become a timeless lesson about what it truly means to serve and protect.